My name is Dr. G. Welcome to That's Unusual, my podcast uncovering the unusual stories behind the world's most interesting people. On this show, we celebrate what makes us different and how we convert those differences into unexpected opportunities. Welcome to this week's episode of That's Unusual. My next guest is an old college friend of mine who has pursued her childhood dreams of becoming an actor. Nina Mehta is an actor, writer, and creative dreamer who turned her passion into her profession. As an ensemble member of the renowned theater and film production company, The Collective, she has appeared in numerous media productions, including being a regular cast member of the Amy Schumer Show. On this episode, we discuss her unlikely journey from being an environmental studies major to hustling her way into theater by following her dreams. We also discuss the challenges of being an actor as a minority, why artistry has always been in her family blood, and what it takes to break through in a highly competitive industry. As you listen to this episode, I ask that you reflect on your own unusual stories and unique qualities that can help you open doors to unexpected opportunities. And so with that, let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of That's Unusual. This is Dr. G, and today I am joined with my good friend, Nina Mehta. Welcome to the show, Nina.
Hi, thanks, Gotham.
So this is actually a fun conversation for me to have because you and I have known each other for a number of years, having gone to college together, sort of went our own ways and hadn't really interconnected, sort of follow through social media and Facebook and keeping track. But you've been doing some really fascinating, interesting stuff and I thought I had an unusual journey in my career, but I certainly think that you've trumped that and have a much greater, more interesting journey compared to mine. So you're now in the creative arts, but I want to sort of go back a little bit and tell us a little bit about your influences growing up and how you ultimately got into the creative arts.
Oh, well, going back, again, before you and I even met, I was, like sort of typical in terms of like kids that like drama or the arts. I probably had like a one-woman show when I was 5 that that my parents recall, and they were probably the only nice people that attended in my living room. And, did drama through grammar school and high school, really did like the sort of typical thing in high school. I was in drama club, I was in chorus, but because we are South Asian, I was also on the academic decathlon.
Right. Got to come out, be a doctor, an engineer, a lawyer.
Exactly. So yeah. I was always sort of balancing maybe two sides of my brain. So always was interested and did that. In terms of, I guess, like influences, I could name like tons of artists and actors and all that, but I think for me, it was, we were children that grew up in the 80s, like really sort of, we're children in the 80s. And, especially when I look at, how my friends and I like parent our children now is very different from the way we were parented. Not good or bad, just different. And I loved TV.
Mm-hmm.
I did. My father hated it. And I think he thought my brain was being rotted. And maybe he wasn't wrong. But for me, it really opened up my imagination. I loved watching TV shows, comedy shows, all of it, just sort of the storytelling, I guess, aspect of it more than anything else. And how it had a way of giving people, a mirror or like even an opening into something that they may not have known about or heard about or whatever. So for me, it was creatively stimulating in terms of like my imagination. It always made me think of stories. And I
feel like it's so interesting that I looking back, whenever I talk to individuals and I try to find out what was really their passion when they were growing up, and they talk about all this, I always used to grab the mic, or I'd be on the stage, or I loved, doing drawing or whatever it might be. I feel like somehow over the course of our life that those elements get lost along the way. And I love the fact that you sort of come back to what originally made you happy in growing up as a kid and sort of keeping that childlike essence within you as we got older. Now, you also have, if I'm correct in my research, you also have some artistry that's in your blood, right? In your ancestry?
Yeah, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, he was a pretty well-known artist, painter of his day, professor at Lucknow University, had some pretty extensive series of works that at this point, I'm pretty sure are kind of around the world. To be fair, I don't think his side of the family did a really good job of cataloging it or maintaining the legacy apart from the name and like knowing where, things are. But I think that's just sort of the state of things from days back. But yeah, he was an amazing painter. My mom has some of his works like that he created for her in our home. I have, pictures of a lot of his famous portraits, and they're really beautiful. So I never was able to draw as well as he was, so I didn't quite get that gene. But yeah.
But you still have some of the creative artistry, perhaps coming from that line of the blood. So you go to college and you follow the typical South Asian academic path of,
sort of.
Not, of course. I mean, I think you studied environmental studies. Is that correct?
I did. And you may remember this, like from school. Like I did sort of follow those typical things in terms of, being a student and picking a major and all that. I changed my major quite a few times, which I guess is also pretty typical. But I never really went down the exact route, but kind of circuitous, or parallel to. Like I could have done biology, for example, and gone down the pre-med route. I could have done political science, at least where we went to school, and gone down the law school route. And they were both things that I was considering, don't get me wrong. Or just do English, which I loved, and not sure what I was going to do with that degree. Instead, at the time, I chose environmental policy, or environmental studies, it was called at the time when we were at school. Funny enough, it was like a new program, I think, when we joined the department. And it was a hybrid of both science and policy. And for me at the time, what worked about why I chose it was because I liked it. That was really it.
As simple as that.
Yeah. I was like, you know what? I'm in college. I might as well study something that I don't know much about and that I want to know more about. That's how that happened.
Yep. Sometimes there is no rationale behind the things that we do in college.
There really wasn't. And there was no real perfect career path at that time. Now there is at that time. I mean, at that time, it was you either go work for the government or you go to law school. And neither of those two things I wanted to do, having been in DC at that point for 4 years. So then after college, you went from DC back to New York, right? Which is your hometown, the New York area, New Jersey. Yeah, I did.
And then what happened there? I mean, did you continue working this is what's fascinating, because I had no idea that you actually had this sort of creative history in you. Because I saw you during your 4 years of studying environmental studies, that it was just when I saw you getting into the arts, I was like, wow, that's really inspirational. So how did you go from that to getting in acting?
Amazing MC at Bhangra Blowout. I don't understand why you couldn't tell.
That's right. So essentially Bhangra Blowout launched your career. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, obviously.
So you go, you make the move to New York, and what happens? Like, when did the shift occur into saying, I want to go and study up acting? And I believe you got, further education around that. Yeah.
Most things in my life have been somewhat accidental. I'm not going to lie. I wish there was like some great path or something that I could pass on, but it's been somewhat accidental. Even me coming back to New York, because it was about 50-50 that I was going to stay in DC or come back to New York in that last couple of months before graduation. Me coming back to New York I had 2 job offers at that time. One was in DC and one was in New York. The one in New York seemed to be a little more interesting at the time. And I, at the time, was ready to come back to New York. I think a part of me was. I didn't want to stay in DC at the time. And that really was it. And about 1 week into my new job here in New York, I realized it was frightening and terrible. And my boss was, again, something out of like Devil Wears Prada. It was like very cliche. And I had that moment of like, oh, crap, what did I do? But as with, as I said, most things are accidental. So even within that first week, one of the women that I was going to be working for, who had already resigned, it was like her last week there, I really liked her. And I was sort of bummed that, okay, great. Now I like someone at this crazy place and she's leaving. but she recruited me a couple months later to where she was working. So it was like, again, somewhat accidental, but yeah, that's how I ended up back in New York. And everything since then has been somewhat accidental, but coming back into the arts was interesting because after sort of the first two jobs, which almost don't count when you're first starting out, my third job, I found I was very comfortable. And I don't mean comfortable as in like you're just content, meaning like I felt like I was in a place where I wanted to be and I liked the people that I was working with. Mm-hmm. And I find that when you like the people that you're working with and you don't hate where you're working, sometimes it frees up your mind and it opens it up. So it was the first time I was able to even just like take a minute and be like, oh, yeah, I want to go back into acting. I've given it a break since high school. So I want to go back. And it was always something of like a nagging little voice in the back of my head, but it just got louder once I was relaxed enough, if you will, to hear it.
And most people don't even recognize that voice until much later in their life. So it's really cool that you sort of recognize that voice early on in your career. Wow. So then at what point did you just start looking into acting gigs and getting into that? Or did you go to William Esper Studio, to sort of build your career and resume around it?
I like most things, I did a lot of research, before I went like full force back in. I, even went to a couple of auditions just sort of on my own, which is in hindsight, I'm like, oh my God, that was horrifying. But I did some research and just like, I sort of ended at the Esper Studio in a couple of ways. There were some people that had mentioned it to me. So it was always like in the list of schools, if you will. I visited a couple different programs, private professional programs in the city. None of it was really speaking to me, to be quite honest. But when I went in for my quote interview at the Esper Studio, I met with actually Bill Esper. He was the one who interviewed me. He ended up not being the one that was my instructor for the 2.5 years that I was there, but he was the person that interviewed me. And I'm sure everyone has a similar story when they've talked to Bill. So mine's not unusual in that respect, but he usually just kind of talks to you about like why you're doing this, it becomes more of a casual conversation. And I think I started crying within like the first 10 minutes of talking to him, which for me, if those that know me, I'm pretty emotional, but it was whatever, I can't remember what it is that he touched on, but whatever it was opened me up in that moment. I was like, yeah, I think I want to go here.
Wow.
And he was very sweet. He offered me a spot at the time, like right in that interview with him, but I couldn't take his classes because he taught during the day and I was still working. Mm-hmm. So then he put me with one of the other instructors who to this day, like I will be forever grateful for having in my life, Terry Knickerbocker, who then I studied with for the 2.5 years that I was there.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So what did you have like a vision in mind? Breaking into the acting industry is, I'm sure a lot of people know, is really, really tough, right? Just getting out there, doing auditions, putting yourself out there. What did you want to do? Were you looking for the big screen? Are you looking for, taking the theater and stage? What was it that you loved about that industry?
The storytelling. Yeah. I wish I could say I had like a big vision of, making big movies or even independent movies or just doing theater. No.
But you write too. Have you written any scripts or things that you?
Nothing that I have shared thus far. I've written things that are not scripts, if you will, just essays and things. But in terms of my fiction or script writing, I don't think I've shared them with my company thus yet, or I haven't finished something that I wanted to share.
So, what are your parents' thoughts on this?
They've been great. They've come to a lot of my shows. They've been really supportive. And I kind of understand it. When I went back in, if you will, and started doing this, I was still working. So I wasn't financially dependent on them. So it's a different scenario when I'm not asking them for money.
Right.
And I think if I had, perhaps they would have felt that they should have had more of an opinion, if you will, or anything. But my parents are pretty good in the sense that like after a certain age, and my dad says this a lot, it's like, we've done our job. like, you're supposed to do this now. Like, if you need my advice, I will certainly give it to you. And sometimes I'll even offer it when you're not asking, but I can't make you do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, to be honest, that's kind of how they've always behaved with both myself and my brother, but certainly more so when we were younger and more financially dependent.
Yeah.
But yeah, so after I got into it, like, they didn't really say much other than, they were just there and supportive. They actually didn't say anything. They're just like, this was great. This was great. Sometimes they come to shows, sometimes they can't. And they're still very pragmatic and realistic about it. Like, my dad is probably just as proud of my day job as he is of something I did on Comedy Central. Like, it gets the same minimal reaction. Where he's just like, that's great. Congratulations.
Yeah, sounds very familiar.
But I
so when you came,
that. I actually really like that. I'm like, okay, good. This will always keep things very level for me.
Yeah, that's so true. It gives you that. It's comforting to know that, but at the same time, it sort of gives you that ability to sort of self-check yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
To some degree. So so you come out of the Esper studio, and you guys created something called. So tell me what happened after that. I mean, did you go on auditions? I think your first screenplay thing was Finding Priya a Prom Date.
Finding Priya a Prom Date. Yeah, that was my first film ever, and it was a short film. It was, like I said, first film ever. I was Priya, so I was like the lead in the film, but it was a crazy experience. I was probably let's just put it this way: I was playing a 16-year-old. I was not 16. And it was a lot of fun. It turned out to be like this amazing experience because most people, they'll talk about doing their first film and it's like some really random project that they look back on being like, oh, what was I thinking? But it was, I worked with, like, again, first time filmmakers, but they were so good. The script was hilarious. Really funny. To this day, I will still say it's like a really funny, solid script in terms of the story narrative. And we had a great time shooting it. It won like a bunch of awards while it did like the film festival circuit. And as these things do, you kind of just push them through all the festivals, hoping it gets picked up or someone wants to develop it further or something like that. I'm not sure where the filmmakers ended up with it because, again, this went on for a few years. But I loved it. I still love it. It's adorable. I got to relive being, well, I don't think I ever was a grouchy 16-year-old, but Priya really was a grouchy, socially awkward 16-year-old. And her parents just want her to go to the prom. That's it.
Yeah, the clips that I've seen look pretty funny. So that's a cool first gig. Well, I did. Yeah, of course. I looked at all the clips on your website and so forth. But so being South Asian, do you feel like it's tougher to break into the industry being Indian? I mean, I know we're starting to see people like Dev Patel and Kal Penn and so forth in sort of mainstream media, which is sort of breaking the ice a little bit. But do you feel like you get typecasted?
It's funny. I've been having this conversation a lot with, I've always been having as actors or actors of color, artists of color, you're always sort of having this conversation. And I remember when Kal Penn was out, like when I started, getting back into the industry, he did a movie with a bunch of my friends called American-Desi, which is really old, but it kind of is like one of those first movies that, South Asian actors wrote and produced for themselves. And it's, if you look it up, you'll find it. But I think, I've been kind of lucky, I will say that, in terms of being typecast or not, at least in theater. I think I've been very lucky in terms of the type of roles I've gotten to play, which is a mix of a lot of different things or, names that sound just like any other, person in this country or like American, if you will, but with me cast in it. TV is a different story. TV is always a little bit tougher. Although, as you said, we are starting to see a lot more of that diversity. I think, and again, if you talk to somebody else, they'll tell you theater is harder too. So I don't think that I'm right or they're wrong. It's an issue. And I think actors of color are always sort of facing it. And it's sad to say, but the more quote unquote of color you are, I think the harder you have it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And it completely makes sense. And in fact, for those who know you and know what you look like, you don't have a traditional Indian look, right? So I could feel like you can be cast either way.
Yeah.
In multiple scenarios, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's why I say I've been lucky. Like I recognize oddly enough, like that privilege, if you will. And I've always known that. But at the same time, you also know that you are a person of color. And it comes out in other ways, like, random things. Like I remember one audition I was at, and at the time, Bend It Like Beckham was really big. So everyone knew who Carmen de Nagra was, right? Mm-hmm. And the casting director, nice as like, did not mean this in an offensive way by any means, was like, oh my God, I love that movie, Bend It Like Beckham. He goes, you look just like her. And I wanted to be like, we look literally nothing alike. She's a beautiful young woman, but we look nothing alike because we're two very different people. But yeah, so things like that will come up, which is kind of funny in hindsight. And that still happens. Hilarious. That still happens. But, I think the longer, and I'm sure you'll hear this from other people who are actors or artists, like the longer you do this, you do develop something of a thick skin. That moment is in the room with the casting person. And then once you're out, I'm done with that when I walk out the room. Yeah. Sometimes, certainly some auditions mean more than others. So that's not to say that I don't walk out and be like, oh, I really should have done it this way. That will always happen. But for the most part, like, I try and like leave it once I walk out the room.
What's the toughest part about the whole process? Is it just getting the auditions, finding a good script? Is it about having the thick skin and taking the criticism that comes through? What's the toughest part about this whole process?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think you do have to understand that this is an industry where there's a more no than yes. So like with any other interviews or jobs that you go on, right? You go on a lot of interviews and there's a chance that you're going to get the job. Like, obviously the more you go on, the less, the statistics will say otherwise. But I think in this industry, because there's so many people going after like this one line on Blue Bloods, statistically, it's the odds are against you. So you do have to sort of prep yourself always like, not that you're not going to get it. That's not what I'm saying. It's that, again, like go in, do your job. Your job is what you're doing in that room. That's your job. And hopefully getting the job as well after that. But your job is actually like doing your audition, doing it well, doing the work that you did on it, and then walking out the room. Because what goes into the casting of it, 98% of it is something that's not even in your control. Yeah. So
do you have some sort of routine ritual to sort of get you ready for that audition?
Usually it's just reading it a lot. Like I try and read with some of my people in my collective. Like we're really good about sort of whenever someone's available, like reading with you, coaching you through it, just having the other person on the other side being like, this is how, that's great. Maybe, how you're saying it is coming across like this. Is that what you want to do? If that wasn't your intention, here's, how do we sort of shift it? So yeah, just sort of reading with someone before that. And unless it's a tape, and then, obviously going on tape with someone that you trust and can work well off of. That's really it. No other, you still get the nerves just before you're called in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you're human. That just means that you're still human. You're still human. But it's like this careful balance between, when I go up and speak, and it's this constant balance of being rehearsed just right? Because you don't want to over rehearse and sound like you've, over memorized and become robotic in the whole thing and sort of unnatural. You don't want to under rehearse and just sort of, buffoon the whole thing. Yeah. Exactly. But there's this art of just being natural enough, so that it just gives the right vibe.
Yeah. And luckily a lot of our training, so at the Esper Studio, they train you in Meisner technique, which again, for me worked, for other actors, maybe they'll find something else that works for them. That I find it works because a lot of it is, it's not called improv, but it is based in that sort of improvisational nature. So yes, the lines are the lines on the page, but how you say them may change because of the person who's reading with you or what they give you, which is great because it allows for a lot of surprise and just fun stuff happens that way.
Yeah. Being able to read the other side. That's really cool. So tell us about, so you got, you got involved with Comedy Central and Inside Amy Schumer. Tell us about how that came about.
Well, that all happened through the collective, actually. So when I left, or when I graduated from the studio, a lot of the founding members of the collective, who actually I wasn't in classes with, They were maybe about, I think, just a year behind me. I think that was it. So I graduated, and something wonderful and awful, depending on how you want to look at it, happened to me at the same time. I got laid off from my day job because it was the end of 2008 and the market was crashing and everybody was getting laid off.
Yep.
And I sort of knew it was coming, again, because of what you read in the news and just, being aware enough, I hope. But I had been there long enough that it was kind of perfect, because I don't know if I would have left just on my own, even though I may have wanted to. But having the other person break up with you sometimes is helpful.
Yeah.
Because I got a breakup, which was nice. And it gave me some time to just sort of like sit back. And it was, serendipitously, if you want to say, like at around the same time I was laid off. So it allowed me to just sort of get back in a deeper way. And one of the people that I went, who was in one of my classes, she was very involved with the collective. She invited me to one of their first shows. Maybe it might have been their second show, forgive me. So they had just come together, if you will. I went to their second show, really liked what they were doing, and she invited me to one of their Monday sessions. And we still do, they're called Collective Mondays. And they're basically workshops. It's just like a Monday where we, as the company members, actors, can work on what we want to work on, which often is the acting. But we all sit in the room, act as the mirror for the people that are working. So, as I was saying, a lot of how our training works is that we're working off of someone else, but also how is that being received? And sometimes that's really interesting information, because you may have thought it was coming across one way, and in fact, it's coming across another way. And that doesn't necessarily have to change what you're doing. It's just information. And sometimes it does change what you're doing. So that's how our Mondays started. They were very small when I first went in. Now it's a little bit bigger, but it's really cool. And it's led to a lot of like really amazing things, apart from just, workshopping pieces that we as actors find interesting or want to work on that we may not have had a chance to work on, to leading to more organic build. One of our first main stage productions we did in the summer of 2010, if I'm not mistaken. And we came through that because those actors were working on those in Mondays. And it was a very nice organic way of building a production that seemed right for the company. It seemed right for the actors, that kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. I think I went around on Mondays a lot.
No, I mean, it's great to have sort of that support and peer group around and sort of creating opportunities, the path. There was a quote that I think I saw on the collective website that said, create your own work as a way to take control over one's career, which is exactly what the collective is doing. So then how did that lead to work with
Amy
Comedy
Schumer,
Central and Amy Schumer?
Well, Amy is one of our founding members. She also went to the Esper studio. So when I joined, it was probably a year into them as a company. So I'm not technically a founding member, although I always tease them. I'm like, I think I should be given retroactive status because I've been here since the beginning. And also our company has changed a lot from that time. So we as a company, after I joined, we moved into more of an ensemble company format, meaning like these are the ensemble actors and these are the people that are taking charge of the company. And we still operate that way, although we're growing. So we're constantly, working on how we maintain that growth and keep the growth of the company in mind, but also what makes sense. So what do we have to change something that we started off with? Things like that. Normal things that all companies face, even artistic theater companies. So Amy's one of the founding members, and she's kind of a big deal now.
Just a bit.
So her show, Inside Amy Schumer, while she was with us, she was also on the road building her career, really working her ass off, hustling on the stand-up circuit. And, when she was in talks with Comedy Central, and I don't have all of this right because, again, I wasn't part of those talks naturally. She had a very specific idea for what she wanted to create for her show. And I give her like so much credit for that, because at that time she was a name, but she certainly wasn't a name the way she is now. Right. So for her to like fight for what her vision, if you will, and get the show she wanted, not easy. But I think, she would also say like a lot of it had to do with, or at least a good portion of it had to do with, what she knew she wanted and how she knew it worked, because we all worked together in that room. So she would bring a lot of those sketches in. We would work as a big, all of us, all 19 of us, through those sketches with her, give her feedback, some of which I'm sure was useful for her, some of which maybe, she decided to go in a different direction with. And those sketches then led to the pilot, and then the pilot then led to the show. And because our company is designed in a way where we always want to, as you said, create the work so that we create work for ourselves, we also want to be bringing that work back into the company. So should one person be doing well, that doesn't mean that everyone else sort of flounders. It just means that it's a collective. Keep getting people
right.
that we're all lifting each other up. So
it's a family that supports each other. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So to Amy's credit, she got her first show. And in that first season, I think she cast almost all of us in some kind of part in, that first season. And then obviously second, third, and fourth, you'll see a lot of recurring faces, including myself, throughout the seasons.
I'm always curious, just on a personal note here. Like, I mean, there's so much talent. Just looking at the list of the people in the collective, there's so much talent that's in there. Like, what is it that makes somebody sort of break out, right? I mean, everyone's working hard. There's so much talent in there. Is it like just being at the right place at the right time? Is it working a little bit extra harder? Is it having the right relationships? I mean, just a big break. I mean, what is it that makes someone like Amy just break out of the pack, right? And just sort of, and that's, the same thing applies to the music industry and, other types. I'm just really curious about, like, is there some sort of secret sauce in there that helps, get somebody to that level?
I think if we knew what the secret sauce was, we'd all be gassing ourselves in it. I think it's all of the above. Like, I remember when the show after the first season hit it big and people were calling her like overnight sensation or something like that. And she would be the first to be like, yeah, overnight. Took me 10 years, but thanks.
Mm-hmm. It's like Louis C.K.'s opening monologue for SNL this past weekend, and he talked about, he's like, I've been doing stand up for 32 years, and it's been great only for the past 4. The first 28 years I was struggling.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a lot of that. Like, you certainly have to work hard. There's no question. There's no way around that. You do. We got to hustle, but there is a part of it that there's a part of this industry, or like luck does play into it. Sometimes it is about being in the right time, right place, right time, or knowing the one right person. And sometimes those things also don't help you. You know what I mean? Like, you think this could be the quote unquote break, and then it's not. So no secret sauce. I don't know it.
Yeah. I mean, that's
working hard and just keep focus. Like, you just have to, as long as you're like focused on why you're doing what you're doing, like, it'll work for you. And that doesn't necessarily mean you get your own show. Something else.
Yeah. Interesting. That's great. So what was that experience like, and being on several of those episodes?
So much fun. So much fun. I mean, again, very lucky. Like, most people get their first TV job and they don't know anyone on set. I was lucky to be friends with, the namesake of the show. So I felt very protected. And it was a way to for me to hang out with my friend on set. And the crew that she assembled is great. We're all like, everyone still talks to each other, or if they've seen each other, I'm saying, like, outside of shooting. So it's for me, tons of fun. Like, it was hard to even imagine it was work.
Yeah. I mean, it just looks like such a fun show to be a part of.
It was
really cool. So what's next for you? What's next in your chapter? What do you want to pursue?
I still want to go back to writing. We were talking about that earlier.
Yeah.
I would like to focus try and focus more on that, get back into it in a way that I don't feel like I'm distracted. Like, I mean, you've written, so you get these moments of like, oh, I got to do this. And then you get distracted by something. And then before you know it, it's like a year, 2 years later, and you're like, oh, I never finished that. And so it's this constant feeling of like failing almost, which I know it's not, but for me, it would be it would really make that little girl happy back in grammar school if I could finish a writing project, or specifically the book that I've been trying to work on for a long time. That maybe, direct more. I've really enjoyed directing. I directed a couple of plays for my company last year and the year before, and it was something that I didn't know that I liked.
Mm-hmm.
Or didn't even know that I might be kind of okay at. I think I'm good at it. I'm definitely not amazing, but I think I'm not bad at it. So I'd like to explore that as well. And obviously,
so if the opportunity is there, you wouldn't mind going from the front of the stage to the back of the stage and helping produce and direct?
No, not at all. In fact, I really enjoyed it. I would like to, maybe even think about directing a film, which totally scares me because that seems like, I don't know why. Maybe it's because I have no perspective on that, but I'm just like, oh, wow, that seems really hard. Can I do that? But I said that to myself before I directed the first play too. So maybe, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I can do that.
Very cool. Well, I'm excited to track your progress over time. And I think the work that you're doing is really fun, really creative. Mm-hmm. So keep that up. This is sort of a good point of transition into what I do for all my guests, which is the rapid fire Mad Lib fill in the blanks.
Oh God, this is scary.
So it's just 6 fill in the blanks. If you're ready, we'll get started.
Okay.
All right, let's start with the first one. The best piece of advice I ever received was?
The best piece of advice I ever received. My dad used to say something to me, and I feel like this is going to get really popular, so I feel like I shouldn't say it out loud, but I'm going to share it. There are 3 things a person should do every day, regardless. 1 thing for yourself. Mm-hmm. 1 thing for someone else, and 1 thing because it's something that you don't want to do, but you know you have to do. So I guess duty, something selfless, and something selfish.
That's pretty cool. I like that.
I do too. And I think I accomplish it on most days.
Yeah, that's great. It's like this little bit of, focus on yourself, have some gratitude. And I like that. I like those 3. All right. The next one for you. I'm most curious about
space travel.
Space travel? How's that?
Out there? I want to go to a different galaxy or a different planet.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's something else out there. It's like the one thing we don't know anything about. And I'm like, what is it?
Yeah. I was a big galaxy. That's right. I mean, I'm always fascinated by space as well.
Yeah.
Cool. So looking back at your younger self, what would you tell your 20-year-old self?
Oh my God, you knew her.
I know. But what would you go back and tell her now that, you've experienced life in such an interesting way?
Nothing. I mean, whatever I told her, she wouldn't listen to anyway, because it's part of the process. You're not supposed to.
That's true. That's the Nina I know.
Yeah. So, but if I had to, I guess I would go back and tell her that she's fine. Everything's fine and she knows what she's doing.
Cool. If you had to write a book about yourself, essentially an autobiography, the title of the book would be?
Oh my God, I've thought about this a lot. I mean, even before this, before us talking about this is the question that you always ask yourself, what would I title my book? I don't know.
No, but this would be a book about yourself, right?
Yeah,
so it's almost like a memoir.
My autobiography, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I certainly know this will be a chapter in it, but maybe it's also a good title. This was, so there's this, in online casting services. So when I was first starting out, a lot of times you're just self-submitting on these things and it's like a black hole. You hear maybe 2% of the time back, right? And I was always self-submitting, never hearing anything. And there was this one casting breakdown that I saw. It was for a movie. It was like a feature movie. And the breakdown for the character was, I can't remember the character's name, but she was the daughter of one of the main leads. And they said, must look like the lead in personality and, facial, obviously. And then they give you a description. They're like, so-and-so is funny, sweet, but she is the ugly duckling that will never become the swan. And I was like, well, I'm going to submit, whatever, right? I never hear back anyway. I feel like those people could not call me back fast enough. I got called almost the minute. I feel like I'm exaggerating. I'm sure it wasn't, but I feel like the minute I hit submit, they call me. They're like, when can we see you on tape? And it was a wonderfully humbling experience. So I was like, yeah, thanks for that, guys. I didn't get the part, so maybe that's a good thing.
So what would the title be?
The ugly duckling that will never become the swan.
Got it. All right.
It's horrifying, isn't it? But it's hilarious.
Oh my, it is pretty funny.
It is.
All right, next one for you. If you could invite 3 people over for dinner or dead or alive, who would you invite and what would you want to talk about?
My great aunt, she just passed about maybe 6 months back. She's an amazing woman. She always was. I always loved talking to her. So I'd love to have her for dinner. Eleanor Roosevelt.
Okay.
And then some comedian. I'm thinking either Stephen Colbert or Dave Chappelle. I think they...
And having them all in the room together, what would you want to talk about?
People and why we do the things that we do to each other. I think they would have a lot of great opinions and thoughts on it. All 3 of them.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I like that list. Yeah. All right, last one for you, Nina. So on this podcast, we celebrate everything that makes us unique, that makes us different, and we call that being unusual. So how would you fill in the following blank? I'm unusual because...
God, I think I struggled with this. I think I was even telling you this the last time I saw you. I'm like, I have no idea. I am unusual because I guess, I don't ever seem to, I think, as I was saying earlier, my life seems to have been, or my career seems to have been like a series of accidents. I mean, they're happy accidents. They're all good. Mm-hmm. So if I had to say what made me unusual, it's for whatever reason, I went in the face of the accident as opposed to
I think that's, you certainly have a unique perspective. It makes sense to me. I like that. Good. It's you're unusual because it's a series of happy accidents along the way that you sort of taken advantage of opportunities that have come about. Yeah. I think it's really cool. Love it. So this was great, Nina. You know what? For those who are listening and want to find out more about your work, about you, about the collective, anything else that we discussed on the show, where would you direct them to go?
Well, you can find me on Twitter. And because I couldn't get my name because someone else already had it, it's Lady Nina. So it's LADI_Nina. This speaks volumes of my social media prowess. But I'm there, and there, I write some good tweets. You can find out about the collective at the collective-ny.org. And my website, which I really need to work on because there's not a whole bunch there, but if you want to go there, you can go to ninametaactor.com.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Hey, well, so great catching up with you, and thank you for sharing all of your backstory and journey with us. I think there's a lot of good lessons that we can learn from within that. So thanks for being on the show, Nina.
Thanks, Gotham. It was good talking to you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi again. It's me, Dr. G. If you are still listening, I'm hoping it's because you enjoyed this podcast. If you would like to hear future episodes, you could really help me out by subscribing to the That's Unusual podcast on iTunes and leaving a review. It goes a long way in helping me get the word out from avid listeners like you. As a thank you, I will be selecting one new reviewer each week at random for a free private 15-minute phone conversation where you can ask me anything and get professional advice on your career or business to help you stand out and make a difference. Also, if you want to be notified of any future episodes, please visit that'sunusualpodcast.com and sign up to receive updates on new episode releases. Until next time, remember to always think unusual.